You're listening to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast.
Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast. We are here, all three of us. I am Rick. We're here with Paul and Anna.
Hi.
No.
Okay, there we go. So, that was not in the order that I introduced them, but I think you get the point.
One of us.
Welcome to the CGG podcast, see? We're coming to you on old-timey radio.
I was just about to say.
Does that work?
Kind
It
of.
does. That sounds pretty good.
It's a Pringles can. Neat.
So, is that how they did it back then?
You have to use Pringles specifically. Yes, it was a classic move.
Pringles is low fidelity. So our topic today is kind of spawned from a little bit of a pseudo debate. We kind of agree on most of it, but when it gets to sort of like the nitpicking, we're kind of a little bit at odds here. So we were talking about Easter eggs versus references, in which I believe that there's a lot of overlap. You know, there are Easter eggs which are also references, but there are Easter eggs which aren't, and there are references which aren't Easter eggs, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. So, we kind of agree. We've kind of talked about the kind of the definition between the two, and, you know, there's, I don't know if it's ever been clearly defined. Like, I know some people have defined it in a way that makes perfect sense, so we've kind of gone with that. But I don't know if there's like an actual like authoritative resource that says that this is this versus that. But so we basically broke it down that an Easter egg is something which has to be hidden and found, usually through some sort of like sequence of actions in which to unlock it. References just mean something that references something outside of the immediate media. So if it's a reference to another game or a book or a movie or a song or anything like that, that's not that's not contained solely within the context of the immediate work, then it's a reference. But again, you know, there are Easter eggs which are references. We see them a lot. We see Easter eggs referencing LucasArts or Sierra in adventure games. But I think where we kind of tend to sort of go back and forth is whether or not things are more Easter egg or more reference when they're kind of both. And one of the things that I've sort of said, which I guess at least you, Anna, are kind of at odds with, I can't remember what Paul's position was on this, but I said that hidden can be not necessarily hidden from view. It could be hidden in plain sight as long as something about the meaning is kind of intended to not be how do I put this?
She's not on the nose.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's something where it's intended that there will be people who do not understand the reference or the or the joke.
Right. Well, and it's funny because I came into this initially, Rick, when we started talking about this a couple of days, with a firm idea in my head of what was and was not an Easter egg. And my lines have been blurred so heavily because when I first came into the conversation, I'm like, an Easter egg is something you have to activate. You have to do a sequence of commands or events, sort of like in a DVD menu, you can activate some sort of an extra scene or something that's locked up in it. But then if I look it up online in, say, the Sierra help pages, an Easter egg can just be a reference to something else that's not a part of the game that it's in. But in between those things, there are still so many gray lines. And I think that's kind of what I want to play with during this episode with you guys.
Yeah. I think, again, a lot of... Sorry, was there anything you wanted to add to this, Paul?
Yeah, I disagree with everything all of you have said.
Okay, now
I'm just going to be very
continuing on with this conversation. That,
you're all wrong, see? No, I do have an opinion. I think two things. One, I err on the side of agreeing with you when it comes to hidden in plain sight for those who understand the reference. But I would argue that if you do get the reference, it's not hidden for you. So it's not, there's the target audience who's going to understand that reference doesn't have to find it. So therefore it's not hidden for its intended audience. So that's the technical, just kind of a dicky thing we can argue about. And then
well, I know, but that's kind of the fun of it though. Cause like I said, there's the lines blur to the point where it starts to be like, okay, when does it stop being a plain reference and when does it start being an Easter egg?
Yeah, well, I think that'd be a good way to, the next thing to focus on, I guess, would maybe set the bar by bringing up examples of like pure, unarguable Easter eggs.
Yeah. So, wait, actually, I'm going to go the other way first. So, like, I used this as a hypothetical example when we were talking about it. So, if you're in a game, presumably, and one of the locations, you come across a building, and the big, like, marquee name of the building, like, right there in big bold letters, takes up like a third of your screen. It says, like, Threepwood International. Right? That's clearly not being hidden from you. It's just there to make the reference, right?
Right.
So that's not an Easter egg because it's right there. Now, you might not understand the reference. And again, this is sort of the part where it starts to be like, okay, is it an Easter egg once you don't understand it? Or is it... but again, it comes down to, well, if this is an adventure game where you can reasonably expect that most of the people playing it are LucasArts fans, no, it's not an Easter egg. You're shoving it in their face. But if you have a giant portrait of Guybrush Threepwood in, what was that game? Uncharted. Yeah. You're talking about like multi-millions of players who actually reasonably might not know that reference. So that would be an Easter egg, even though it's like half the screen.
That actually ties into my second point of nitpick, which would be, I don't think it's possible to make an adventure game reference in an adventure game and it be an Easter egg. In other words, if you have an adventure game and you find a picture of Guybrush on the wall like Uncharted, it like there's almost no way for it to work. And if it's going to be a 90 to 10 kind of percentile. It's where basically everyone's going to get it. So it's at that point, I think it's definitely a reference.
Yes.
Or like the King's Quest poster in Minecraft that you can generate.
Yes.
To go up on your wall. Something like that.
Yeah.
But again, we're talking right now about plain sight because you can make those references, but have them hidden, right? And then it would be an Easter egg.
To Anna's point, she mentioned finding King Graham in Minecraft, which I did recently with my son and was so excited just to see him randomly in somebody's world. Wait, was it Minecraft? Might have been Roblox.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
No, it's in Minecraft.
It is, okay. Yeah. And so that's a perfect example. So King Graham in Minecraft, to me, again, is an Easter egg, whereas King Graham in any other adventure game period is a reference.
Again, depends how hidden it is.
If it's a picture on the wall.
Yes, correct.
Right.
But again, there's also the size of the picture, if you ask me.
Very true. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, well, to take this off the table, if you have to look at it and be told by the game what it is, that's definitely more on the Easter egg side. But what if it's just really small and hard to see?
Then I would still say it's an Easter egg. If it's something which you could reasonably miss.
There you go. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So like, I also used an example of, let's say there's like, you're in a room in an adventure game. We're going with that. And you're in an office and like, in one corner of the office, there's a desk. And then on that desk, there's like a little paperweight in the shape of a purple tentacle. So we're talking like within like, like millimeters, but it's like pretty clear. It's something which your eyes are not drawn to, necessarily. It is something which you could see because it is right there, but it's something which even somebody who has played Day of the Tentacle or Maniac Mansion, whichever one, might actually not be faulted for missing it.
Okay, and so that brings me to the spirit of Easter eggs, right? Where I feel like the spirit of an Easter egg should be being rewarded for exploration. So what you just described, there is exploration involved because like one or two casual passes of the room, you're probably going to miss it. But if you really are detail oriented and taking account everything in the room as you probably should in an adventure game, then you'll be rewarded by noticing what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, in other words, maybe that's kind of a barrier for Easter eggs. Like, if there's, in the spirit of them, if there's a reward for, you know, if you have to seek it out in any way to begin with.
Yeah. Now, to be fair here, I did start this conversation when we started it off mic. I did go into this thinking that everything's an Easter egg, right? And then you guys did get me to move on that. I'm like, okay, yeah, I guess Easter eggs are something which are to be hidden, but the part where I'm not budging is that hidden can be more conceptual than physical.
Honestly, I started harder, and now, like, honestly, not all Easter eggs are references, but all references are Easter eggs, I think.
That's what I'm arguing against.
I know, I know. It's so hard, but honestly, after going through the Sierra Help, okay.
Let me put it this way. Here, I'll let you go first, just because I do have like an example, but it's not really gaming related. So
okay, yeah. First. Well, here's my example. Okay, so what about this? If a reference has to be a reference to something outside of the immediate game, and an Easter egg is something that potentially you have to activate or you have to find, what if you're playing a game and in every room of the game there's a cuckoo clock? It's kind of hidden. It's not really obvious that it's there, but it's like the in-joke of the game, and there's always one in every single room somewhere. Yeah. You wouldn't really notice it maybe your first time playing through the game, but after you clue into it, you play the game a second time and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I see it. Now there's cuckoo clocks everywhere. Is that an Easter egg or a reference?
I would consider that to be an Easter egg. It would not be a reference. One way or another, it would not be a reference.
No, it wouldn't. It couldn't, because it's what it would be referring to, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So here's an example for me of when something stopped being an Easter egg and became a reference. So,
okay.
In one of the early seasons of Family Guy, they have a little joke where they play the end credit music to the old Incredible Hulk TV movie series.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, anyone who's seen that, I don't know what they are, if it was like a series or like at least a series of made-for-TV movies or something like that. Anyone who's seen one of them will definitely recognize that tune. It's very recognizable. It's very iconic, but it can be reasonably expected that not everyone, or even like possibly a minority of people who watch that, would clue into that reference themselves. So if they just had a scene of Stewie hitchhiking and they played that tune, that would be an Easter egg, because it's something which you have to discover if you happen to be aware of that reference. But that's not what Family Guy did. Instead, Family Guy had Stewie say, "Hey, why don't you play that tune from the end credits of Incredible Hulk?" Well, now, even contained within this episode that you are immediately watching, they have provided the full context. And now it is a reference because it is not in any way hidden. It was pushed right in front of your face. You might not recognize it, but they told you exactly what it is and gave all the context that was needed to understand it.
Right. So it's a reference that couldn't be considered an Easter egg. So what you're saying is not all references could be considered Easter eggs.
Correct.
So then what about if you're watching something like Breaking Bad and you don't realize the first thing through that there's maybe a significance of a certain color, and you're like, you don't know how it has bearing on the story, you don't even notice it happens, but then on the second playthrough you start noticing a whole bunch of things are a certain color. What is that?
An Easter egg.
I don't know about that.
I don't know. It's like, isn't it a plot
I don't think it is.
Or something?
I loosely speaking, it would be an Easter egg. But because it's something which you kind of have to figure out and discover. Honestly, the best term for that would be symbolism.
Yeah.
Well, because it makes me think of like was it Schindler's List with the red? I mean, is that just a storytelling device at that point? You know what I mean? It's not like anyone's gonna discover it. It's in their face. Well,
that's clearly not.
It's as discovered as the screen.
That's not an Easter egg at all.
But isn't that kind of what Anna was just describing?
No,
that you said was an Easter egg.
No, because there is a hidden what Anna described, like in specific to Breaking Bad, there are certain colors, and there is something like in The Godfather, every time someone eats an orange, or anytime an orange appears on screen, something to do with death is foreshadowed or discussed or occurs. Something like that, right? That is something you can miss. That's absolutely something you can miss. Even if you see the colors or see the oranges, you don't necessarily know what the importance is. And you probably aren't going to notice that on the first time. And when you watch it again, you'll be like, oh, hey, I just noticed that every time there's an orange on screen, they either talk about killing someone or somebody dies, or there's some sort of like a foreshadowing of the death. Or in Breaking Bad, I forget exactly what color it was, but I know.
Yeah, it's like purple, I think.
I don't know exactly what it is, but you can say like, hey, when you think about it, this color represents this. Whereas Schindler's List was a black and white movie for the most part. There were some color sections, and even in the black and white sections, there was a girl with a red jacket.
Right, yeah.
And the reason to have that red jacket is so that you would recognize later on you see the red jacket show up again. That's not an Easter egg. Like, that's very blatantly the point of that, of introducing that character.
Yeah. Well, no, nobody's arguing that is an Easter egg. I was just thinking that was similar enough to what Anna was saying to say that Anna's isn't either. But one, I've never seen Breaking Bad. And two, I didn't consider the fact. No, Schindler's List I did see. Again, I don't think it's a bloody Easter egg. I was using it to laminate the fact that possibly what Anna was saying wasn't, but again, it wasn't related because I didn't consider that the rest of it wasn't in black and white. But yeah, I mean,
I can't call it an Easter egg. It doesn't seem to be because to me, an Easter egg would be when you buy the Breaking Bad DVD and when you first put it in the DVD player and you press left, right, A, B, rewind, 1, 2, 4. Yeah.
That is absolutely an Easter egg.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So before we go on too much farther, let's kind of take stock of where the three of us are at as far as where our opinions might differ or not. And where I'm confused there, I think, is the difference between an Easter egg and the thing we touched on earlier was inside jokes kind of situation where a fraction of the audience is designed to get it. So is it an Easter egg for them? Blah, blah, blah. So I think where the line blurs to clear that up, like verbally, would be, the difference between an obscure reference and an Easter egg. When is a hidden joke either an Easter egg or just a really obscure reference?
That is a really good question.
Yeah, good point.
Which I'm not sure I'd be able. Again, this is one of those things where I don't believe that there is a black and white and everything's on one side or the other side. I think that it would be better to take an example and dissect it, because it's hard to just give like a blanket answer that this will be the line when it crosses over, right? I think most in-jokes are Easter eggs to a certain degree. And I know that kind of contradicts when I say that there are references that aren't Easter eggs. But again, I think a lot is determined by the execution and or intent. So just because I don't get a reference doesn't mean it's an Easter egg.
Right.
I mean, like, here's the most, like, basic reference, right? Which counts as a reference and is totally not an Easter egg. If you're watching the sequel of a movie and they talk about events that happen in the first movie with the assumption that you have already seen that first movie, that's a reference.
Because if you hadn't seen the first movie, it would just all go over your head and may or may not change the enjoyment of the movie anyways.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right? So that would just be a flat out reference.
So real quick, just to illustrate what you're saying, and to make sure we're on the same page, would this be the equivalent of like modern day of a MCU crossover where a character shows up in another property and you're like, hey, it's the bloody, he's from the other movie? Is
that like Star Wars and The Simpsons beginning now? Because Star Wars owns Simpsons now or something. Right.
No, well, because I think that I'm not saying no, but that would be a different conversation, just because that's all like, who owns IPs and stuff. But just as far as if Marvel has one of their characters, if Marvel has Thor walk into a Spider-Man thing, that sounds like what you're describing, which I agree is not an Easter egg. But once you attach Marvel to it and put it that way, it starts to sound more like an Easter egg.
again, it depends on intent and execution, right? So, here's an interesting one, because this is kind of a reference and an Easter egg in the MCU. Because I've seen Endgame like a couple of times. Not fully. I watched The Last Battle like a couple of times, but I did see like the full movie once in theaters. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until it was drawn to my attention and I had to look up a screenshot where they circled on the picture in the end battle when everyone's coming out of the portals. You can see Howard the Duck. Right?
Right. Okay.
Funny.
Howard the Duck, did have an on-screen appearance at the end of, was it Guardians of the Galaxy? Or was it another one? It was Guardians of the Galaxy, right? Yeah.
Definitely Guardians. I don't remember which one. I think the first.
It would be the first one then. Yeah. So, that's an Easter egg because it's hard to find. Mm-hmm. And it's a reference because it referenced the other movie. Now, if it's something like, again, like if it's Captain America Civil War and every superhero from the MCU up to that point shows up, that's not really a reference. That's just like part of the story. Right? Yeah, well, and that line gets blurred because if they were, quote, supposed to be in the movie or not can also have effect, right? Where it's like, if Endgame's not the best example here because they're all expected, but if it's like, if you don't expect Doctor Strange in Spider-Man, that could be a thing. And actually, just to highlight the point we're working on right now, in that Endgame scene, a good example. So you got Howard the Duck, like you said, Rick, which is a great point. And it doesn't matter who owns it legally. It's not expected with Marvel stuff. I get it. There was comics in the early 80s, whatever. It doesn't matter. For the mass majority, that's an Easter egg. But then there's another scene, in that same scene, Spider-Man is swinging into battle. Mm-hmm. And if you happen to notice it and then happen to ask yourself, what's he swinging on? He's swinging on giant Ant-Man, which is adorable, first of all. Very cool. I'm glad they thought of that. Cause it works. But it's like, when you watch the 36 Easter eggs you missed in the MCU, those will be mentioned next to each other. And I'm not trying to pick them apart. I get it. And actually, I love what they're doing. Those videos are so much fun. Mm-hmm. But I would just say, if we're splitting hairs, that, the Spider-Man one is absolutely not an Easter egg, whereas the Howard the Duck one is. So, you know what I mean? It's like within that same little concentrated scene, you can see our argument playing out. Mm-hmm. Or the line blurring, I should say.
It's interesting if you go back to the origin. I mean, the term Easter egg was coined in about 1979 by the director of Atari's consumer division, and it was specifically created to describe a hidden message in one particular game, right? Adventure. And you had to go out of your way to find it. You had to find like this one hidden pixel or, to find this one specific thing. And it starts that as being its base, and it gets more and more complicated. Sometimes you have to fly in a specific angle in a certain direction, and then you see a McDonald's. So in this context.
And in the example of Adventure, it was a pure Easter egg because I think it was just like a credit screen or something like that, or I don't know if he gave like credit to everyone or if it was just him taking credit, but it was like some sort of like a credit screen. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't really again, I wouldn't really call that a reference.
Credits. You had to find it.
No, I know. Yeah. And that's why it's an Easter egg. It was hidden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Easter egg, not a reference. Yeah,
and I wouldn't call it a reference because even if it is referencing somebody outside of that world, it's not anyone that anyone really should be reasonably expected to be aware of.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. What it is now and what it was is very different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't know. The fact that Spider-Man is swinging on Ant-Man, that's kind of pretty on the line. I think I would err on the side of saying it's not really an Easter egg, but I'd say it's pretty close to the line. Because it is something which you miss. It is.
It's a fun example of how blurry the line gets.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But these are things that are called Easter eggs nowadays. Like it's.
Yeah, I know.
If you go on YouTube, that's an Easter egg. But I'm giving more validation to you even bringing that up. Like in case people are listening, like of course it's like, well, keep in mind like people call that stuff Easter eggs, and it's to me that's just that's signature character stuff. That's been happening for years.
But yeah, like a few days ago, if you had asked me, I probably would have just reflexively called that an Easter egg, because I just, anything Easter egg is sort of like, hey, that's a cool thing I noticed and rewarded for it, because I just kind of felt like anything that you kind of just feel rewarded for finding is an Easter egg. And then you kind of like challenged me on that, and I did sort of think, like, okay, no, what you say makes sense. It does have to be at least to some degree hidden. But again, that comes down to reasonable doubt, right?
Yeah, it really does.
Because it's potentially very circumstantial.
Yes.
Yeah. I've sort of switched to your opinion a little bit more, and you've switched to mine. It's like, it feels like by the end of this episode, we'll both be arguing the opposite person's arguments at each other. So really that gray line is thin.
Well, again, like I said, we are meeting it. We've met at the middle. We just don't really know exactly where the middle is.
As you said many times, mate, there's no definition. So I would kind of go back to the first Easter egg, which would be the one in Adventure. And then I would think about the term that they chose to use, which would be, Easter egg. So you definitely hide Easter eggs out of plain sight, right? And we talked in chat about this, where I was like, you could paint the egg in camouflage and put it in a bush in plain sight. Not even a bush, but against camo or against something green. It's a dick move, but it's still kind of hidden. So that's where the blurred line is as far as plain sight stuff goes. But ultimately, semantics aside, it's like an Easter egg is something 99.9% of the time is hidden out of plain sight to be found. And that does fit the description of the first Easter egg in Adventure, where you do have to go out of your way to find it.
Yeah,
definitely.
But again, so even if we were to say that could potentially be the official kind of definition, which is it has to be hidden, I would even disagree with that, because I do think that that's your purple tentacle example on the desk as a paperweight or stapler or whatever is why I would argue against that, because there are times where it could take you a few passes before you notice it, things like that. So. Yeah.
So, and again, I believe Anna sent us a little screenshot of like a post where some guy was complaining about how the difference between Easter eggs and references, and of course, there's going to be overlap. We've established that. We never denied that. But he was very rigid, or whoever that poster was, he or she was very rigid in their definition that an Easter egg had to be something that you had to go out of your way through a series of actions to unlock. And that was the part where I sort of like, yeah, I agree that those are Easter eggs, but I don't agree that anything outside of that is not.
Right.
Again, the entire debate on this is the whole idea of being hidden in plain sight, like hidden meaning, hidden context. There are things that can be hidden, and it's not necessarily always physical.
Right.
We are, by the way, talking about on the Reddit pet peeves, and this would be Redditor 10-ounce can, because I'm sure you, my friend, listen to our podcast.
Yeah. Sorry, what exactly did you, since we're giving the full credit, what exactly was the post?
He said people don't know the difference between an Easter egg and a reference. So he is saying, and he or she, I will say our Redditor friend is saying, an Easter egg is a hidden thing that is acquired by completing a specific task or series of tasks. But a reference is when you're talking about something from another game show or a genre and you get a reference from it. That's not hidden or secret in any way. So he's sort of drawing the line there.
Yeah, and again, like I said, I agree with like the last couple of sentences fully, and I do to some extent agree with the beginning of it, but I just think that there is a little bit more nuance. And I just generally think that in anything, there's always going to be nothing's going to be limited to set rules. I think the fact that people expect things to only be neat, tidy rules is kind of it removes a lot of complexity from lines of thought. Right. I'm not saying simple is bad. There's a lot of times where simple is really good. But when we try to oversimplify things and say, no, it's black and white, here's the line, there's a lot of nuance, context, and a lot of things that get missed. And this is why we come across instances like, the whole debate over comedy outrages, right? Because people can't contextualize what is comedy and what is intended to be literal and what is intended to be satire. Because that's an effect of it. I'm not saying that this is like, completely a cause and effect thing, but if we are going to think of, oh, well, everything must be black and white, and this is this, and that is that, it leads to that kind of thinking of like, well, there is no such thing as tone and sarcasm and satire or parody, right?
Yeah, and that brings us, I think, to the kind of the moral of the episode, which would be that there is no hard definition, and that's to me that's the only correct answer, is that there isn't one, because if I had to, I think the reason the gentleman on or lady on Reddit was rigid is because if you're going to put it in a camp, in a hard rule, it has to be rigid. It definitely does. So if we have to, say, on paper the bloody Webster's definition of Easter egg, I would go against my own instincts and say it has to be hidden out of sight, like the first one was, and like the thing it's named after.
Okay,
but
well, how about this?
I don't want to do that because I don't want to do that because that's not how I actually feel. I'm just saying that's what it would look like if we had to put it in a hard rule, and that's why I don't want to put it in a hard rule, because it's so much more complicated than that.
But and again, to back that up and to sort of like flesh that out a little bit, there are definitions, and then there's the spirit of the definition, right? So, a classic example of that is in terms of like hard definitions is describe to me a chair, please.
Oh, yeah, you've got like
something you sit on.
Yeah,
something
rigid,
you sit on.
hard back, 4 legs.
So if I sit on the floor, is that a chair?
Sorry, what is something you sit on? Boo.
Okay, so starting with Paul's definition. Starting with Paul's definition, a chair is something you sit on. If I sit on a floor, if I sit on a bed, if I sit on a table, are those chairs?
No.
Okay. And what was your definition, Anna?
4 legs.
Okay, so I'm sitting on an office chair right now, right? Looking down, the base of my chair has 5 spokes on wheels. So is this not a chair?
Right, absolutely not.
No,
doesn't
it's
have
not
4
a chair.
legs.
Okay.
Yes, it's a chair. Yes, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
There.
So again,
exactly.
we can pick apart, if we are going by technical definitions, how do you define a chair? And again, like you said,
Exactly.
there's a thing about the seat. What's a seat? When you're on an airplane, what are you sitting on? Is that a seat or a chair? Why is it one or the other?
What if I expanded on? I said something to sit on. What if I expanded that to something made specifically to sit on?
Okay, so is a stool a chair?
Damn it.
Well, on that, okay, well, the one that kind of really started changing my mind was the difference. Okay, so you walk into the airport in Police Quest and you see Leisure Suit Larry sitting in the chair, as compared to in King's Quest 4 when you're in the whale and you pick up a bottle and there's a note inside referencing Police Quest. Both of those are Easter eggs. Both of those are references, but they're like on way different levels, because one of them, he's just sitting there. And it's like, okay, but the other one, you have to pick up a thing and find it and read it, but still they're both kind of obvious, right? But they're also still both Easter eggs.
The bottle thing is an Easter egg. I think that's pretty full stop. Leisure Suit Larry, I know I actually even said initially, when we were talking about this earlier, that was definitely an Easter egg, and now I don't think so.
But Sierra thinks it is. Like, in the website, it's like, here's some Easter eggs you might find. And it considers things like that solid Easter egg.
Yeah. I don't think referencing the single most famous Sierra character in another... Sorry? Okay. I again, for the same reason that, making a Monkey Island reference in an adventure game is not really an Easter egg anymore, I'd say, like, referencing the single most famous Sierra character in a Sierra game kind of stops it from being an Easter egg when he's in plain sight.
Yeah, well, here's a way to put it, because I 100% see it as a reference and not an Easter egg. What if Leisure Suit Larry showed up in Loom?
Again, it depends how it's done.
Yeah, and did you have to activate him to show up, or is he just standing there waiting for you to talk to him, or do you need to like do something weird for him to be there?
Assuming that he is in plain sight and it's not activated, I would say it would still depend. Is it do you walk into a room and he's there, or is he like in amongst a crowd of other people?
let me change it to Sam and Max because I feel like you would be more likely to see Larry there. And let's just act like Sam and Max has an airport scene. So Leisure Suit Larry, it's the exact same scene, but it's in Sam and Max.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it depends how it's done.
He's just sitting there and he happens to be one of the people waiting for a flight. You can go up and talk to him and he might say something obscure about Sierra that, and then that's that. But he's just like that kind of NPC.
That would be a little bit
exactly
weird because
like Police Quest.
Yeah. I would side on reference, but if you were to put me on a debate team, I could probably argue either way.
Right.
Because if I go to one of those Sierra pages online that's like, hey, where do I find Easter eggs in Sierra games? And you get the Sierra Help or one of those other sites. They call them, here's a list of Easter eggs you can find.
We've already established that other people don't know the difference.
Yes.
But again, it comes down to like broad definitions versus understanding the spirit of the definitions. And one thing that kind of gets me, one of my /r/pet peeves is there's a famous line from Futurama in which somebody says, "You are technically correct, the best kind of correct," which you've probably heard that one before.
Yes.
Funny line, great. I love it. I've used it myself a few times as satire, as it was intended to be. The fact that people use that unironically is baffling to me, and I think that is kind of a sign of a very simplistic way of overly simplistic way of thinking. Because the whole point of that was it was ironic. That's clearly not the best kind of correct. Is just by this sheer technical definition. Even within the context of that episode, it was clearly pointed out as being a fallacy, right? So I just hate it when people unironically use that line as if that was supposed to be like, oh, Futurama came across a golden truth, which I'm going to use. I did actually post to the Classic Gamers Guild Facebook group without any real context. I just said, okay, what are your favorite Easter eggs? That's it. I just said, word for word, I said, specifically regarding point and click and parser adventure games, what are your favorite Easter eggs? So we got a few, we have a few responses, quite a few responses. And there are a few here which I do think we're going to have a little bit of a stumble on. So I'm going to pose a few of these to you.
I haven't read them yet on purpose because I really wanted to think about them fresh for this episode.
So Christopher Otis says Earl Sinclair in Quest for Glory 1. Hands down, no contest for me. I was just so flabbergasted by it at the age of 13, 14, and I'd never seen such a cameo reference in a video game, so it'll always spring to mind first. I'm going to group that with also a couple of other people. Steve Radley, Christina Andrews, and were there anyone else? I think that's about it. That they mentioned the Batmobile in King's Quest 2. So I think those two are pretty much what you say about one will apply to the other.
And Heroes Quest. Yeah, exactly.
So would that be a reference or an Easter egg? And this is where I think it gets a little bit confusing.
It's super confusing because it would be referred to as an Easter egg anywhere you look for it.
Who cares what other people refer to? We're talking about when you guys stop. I know that there's Easter egg web pages, but we're not talking about what other people refer to. It's what we think now.
I think I'm basically falling back on things I said previously in this episode, and I'm not even sure if I stand by them, but it's all I have to stand on, ground-wise. So what we previously covered and sort of established, or I suppose the point I was trying to make with that Leisure Suit Larry bit, or what if that exact same reference happened in a LucasArts property? So that's kind of what's happening here, where I feel like a property first of all, the Batmobile one is, because it's, actually I can't be that definitive, because I think that's a randomly generated thing where there's like a 1 in 40 chance that'll happen in the room. I'm pretty sure that's how it is.
The
you don't actually
dinosaurs
have to
one is like that too. Yeah. Well, the Earl, that's in the VGA version, and it'll just kind of randomly come up in one scene.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I'm coming from with it's a little bit murkier here because they are random incidents.
Well, I'll say this: if it was a reference to another Sierra game, I would say it's not. But because it's a different property, like Batman, for example, or dinosaurs, I'm going to say it is because it feels like it is.
Yeah, it feels like it is.
But that might contradict what I've said before.
Because like I said, the codename Iceman, the submarine in another Sierra game too, it's like it's randomly there. It's not always there. You walk in, it pops up, but it's not like Batman in a Sierra game, but it's still along the same lines. And I don't know what, but I call them all Easter eggs anyways. I think they're Easter eggs.
See, and
I might not have said like 3 days ago.
Yeah. Well, here's my thing. I would consider them more references. If it were a guaranteed thing, like if you, every time you walk into that screen, or every first time you enter a certain screen, you'll see Earl walk by, or you'll see the Batmobile go by. So it's basically, you're going to see it. I would consider it just a reference. I don't care the IP. I don't care what it's referencing. It's a reference. What murks it up a little bit is the fact that it's a random event. But just because it's random, it's still very likely that in the course of the gameplay, you're going to come across it.
Well, conversely, and this just popped in my head, is that this is going to be so like just arguing semantics in a sense, but it is sort of hidden in its random number generator. You know, if you think of it, if you visualize 40 numbers, or, 40 red balloons, but one of them is blue, and it represents the time you get to see that, then in a sense that is kind of hidden. I guess what I'm really lamenting is that you could bend and twist it to work however you want.
Either way, yeah, you really could.
Okay. Here's one for you. This is an interesting one. Cerebus the Aardvark showing up in Quest for Glory 3. Now, I asked, do you mean Arnie the Aardvark? Because if not, I'm not aware of this one. If you could elaborate on this, it would be very helpful to me. And so the poster replied back saying, Arnie is designed to look like the comic book character Cerebus, one of the biggest independent comics of the 80s. So that was completely over my head, right? I never knew that. And he linked the Wikipedia so I could see a picture of Cerebus, and it's spot on. Like, no dispute here.
Yeah, I'm totally
he's
seeing
very
this.
clearly, obviously based on that character. But does that make it an Easter egg? Because it's a reference which can go over your head, doesn't necessarily mean it's an Easter egg, especially
it's
since
not hidden because he's a character in the game that you have. He's like a plot point.
He's not really a plot point. He's not an interesting one. He kind of gives you some exposition and extra lore, but he's essentially unavoidable because he'll always show up the first time you sleep in the wild.
Exactly. I've never played it and not run into him. So Jesus, he really is just like, hey, thanks, Gilder, for teaching me something today. I learned something
me too.
new.
I had no idea. So, okay, but again, for that reason, I wouldn't consider it an Easter egg under my new understanding of it.
I would agree with you, Rick, on that. I would say that is a reference, solid.
And that being said, it's I wouldn't fault anyone for claiming it to be an Easter egg because the fact that there really is no reasonable expectation that everyone who's playing that will understand that reference, because I sure as hell didn't.
Well, I guess to that I would say there's a difference between understanding something and discovering something, right? So it's like, I know, I'll speak for myself. I have a knee-jerk reaction where if I see something I recognize it's not supposed to be there, I'll be like, I found this, but it's like, you didn't find it, you just recognize it.
Yeah.
And where a lot of people or some people might not. So it doesn't, you didn't find anything, you just happen to understand the reference.
What about if you're a kid and you're young, you're like too young to understand any of these sexual references in a movie. So as you get older, you understand more words and you get what they were talking about, even though you wouldn't have recognized it or seen it because you didn't know about it before. But there's no way that could be an Easter egg. And it's not even really a reference either, is it? It's just gaining knowledge and understanding something. But in a way, it's kind of the same thing. That confuses me.
I would have to stand by what I had just said, where it's like, just because you do or do not understand it doesn't really mean it's an Easter egg or not.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
agree.
also think that there are things that are neither.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes, agreed. Very much so.
No kidding. Yeah, I agree. Stephen Richard Watson writes, the Psycho shower scene Easter egg in Colonel's Bequest.
Yeah. I think that's super safe, like, poster child for an Easter egg.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which, of course, is also a reference.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh,
they
definitely.
They could be
It's
both.
both.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
This one is pretty hands down, but I'm going to mention it just because it's a very good example. Eric Elgarot.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about in the EGA version of Heroes Quest, or / Quest for Glory 1, but the EGA version, in the opening scene, where it says introduction, start new hero, continue quest, if you right click and therefore look at the little scorpion crawling up the poster, it says, congratulations, you have discovered the first bug in this game.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's cute. And I would definitely call that an Easter egg.
Mm-hmm. Jeff Gilligan says the don't push button in Space Quest. I think a couple of people also mentioned that as well. Do they? No, maybe not. Maybe just him. But yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That's right on the line for me, because it's like, it's kind of, it's visible and it's asking for it.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty there.
And when I say visible, I mean, well, it's not audible either. It's readable. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like, don't touch.
I guess you do have to, look and check, and you do have to explore the ship a bit to discover the button in it, especially with the parser set up. So I guess I'll say yeah, because by my own apparent rule, I guess, is
And
You
then
have to. Well, here's the thing, though. You have to see that, because if you're playing it for the first time, you're not going to know what buttons to push. So you're going to look at the buttons, and it'll say there's one for power, one for auto nav, and one that says don't push. So you're going to see the message that says don't push.
Yeah, but look at where
at the same time,
takes you somewhere
it's very
completely.
clearly, very clearly something which you might not push it. Like if you subscribe to if you subscribe to that sort of LucasArts gaming mentality of like, well, I don't want to die, you probably aren't going to push it because you know that it's going to be bad.
I don't know. It's kind of like, is a fourth wall break automatically an Easter egg in this case too?
No.
Because it kind of does. It's kind of like, oh, now I'm taking you out of the context of the game, right? Don't they take you to a different game or something, right?
They take you to King's Quest, at least in
exactly.
the EGA version.
Yeah. And then they're like, oh, it's like Ken and Roberta talking to each other, and they're actually making like mention of the games. It's kind of like in the end of Larry 3, but you don't need to push a button or find it either.
Yeah, but
that's not
but
an
to
Easter
activate it does take that one little step of going out of your way, but it's really not hidden.
No. I'd still call this an Easter egg. I would definitely call this an Easter egg. Yeah.
It is. It's probably the best example we found so far for me that is the line itself. And I don't.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I think that is very much like the borderline, the most minimal.
Like, I think it's so much the line that a little left of saying yes, it is, and a little, like, I don't feel like either of those are right either. Like, I think it just needs to stay on the line where it is. I'll say yes, in part because it brings you to that King's Quest thing, which I know is a reference to its own property, which I've been banging on about. It was a very confusing subject, but I guess I'll say yes because you kind of have to look for it. I mean, it's assumed you're going to. It's really tough to call.
One thing you keep bringing up the fact that whether or not it's its own property or it's intellectual property of the same company. So what would you then say for like seeing a picture of a three-headed monkey in the the new Leisure Suit Larry games?
I would say that breaks a different rule for me. So before I can even check it against that argument, it would already have lost to a previous argument, which is a reference to an adventure game in an adventure game is a reference, is not an Easter egg, because everyone's going to get it. The majority's going to get it, let's say. So, but yeah, because it fails that argument, I can't even bring it to this one. Well, and I just sent you guys a picture, and to narrate it to the listeners, it's Dave the Technical. I don't want to really waste much more time, but I basically, my point is I may have messed up my memory, and the Max reference I was recalling was actually from Day of the Tentacle, because I just don't remember being as obvious as The Last Crusade, but I can't find the original screenshot, and in the remastered screenshot, it's very obviously Max hanging on the wall in a painting in the hallway in the mansion in Day of the Tentacle. Jesus.
Right.
But I just, upon digging that picture up, I found a picture next to it that you guys are probably looking at now, and it's a good way to differentiate, again, the two between a reference and an Easter egg, because if you zoom in almost to a digital level, you can see Jar Jar Binks. Again, it's the remastered version, in one of the pictures. So they're both pictures on the same wall. One of them is just very clear, and you can see it clear as day, and it's Max. So I guess that's more of a reference. Whereas the Jar Jar Binks one, I'd probably miss it because I'm not a big Star Wars guy. No disrespect, I just don't know it well. So I could say that probably is, but even that's arguable.
I'd say that's an Easter egg, because I would not have seen that if it weren't pointed out to me, even though it's right there.
It's tiny, it's on the wall, it's outside of the game genre. I mean, there's a few things that I would have called it just a reference, but after this conversation, I would probably call this an Easter egg.
I'd say it's an Easter egg because it's hard to see. It's in plain sight, but it's hidden in plain sight. It's like, from a distance, you can't even really tell what it is. Mm-hmm. There's very little contrast on it, so even when you blow it up, it's kind of only kind of clear. It's only just clear enough to know what it is. Mm-hmm. And that's when you blow it up. I could have played this game and never noticed that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've actually played this game several times with my son recently. And we switch back and forth between the two because he likes seeing it more or whatever. And I've never noticed it. And if this is the first time anyone's hearing of it, and you happen to hate Jar Jar Binks but love Day of the Tentacle, I am sorry to report that. From what I understand, he gets people quite whipped up. Mm-hmm. I have no emotional investment whatsoever.
None. A couple of days ago, I was in a completely different position, and after talking about it, I'm in a completely different position again. I thought, it was hard and fast, and, I thought your opinion seemed kind of hard and fast, and now I've switched places with you and switched back again, and I think that makes it a really interesting topic. I'm kind of curious to see what other people think. Where do you draw your line? Is it an Easter egg? Is it a reference? Is it neither? What else is there that could be confused for both? Write us, send us something and tell us what you think about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll add to that if you see a reference that's spoon fed to you and you're like, that's an Easter egg, then bloody great. You think of them however you want to. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's a finite amount of time here on this rock in space. Do what you want to do. Think what you want to think. It's fine. It's just all just pretend tomfoolery nonsense. Cause I will say, like, I was recently playing Echo Quest with my son, and one of us clicked on the computer and it was an Easter egg. It pulls up, a screen from King's Quest V, and Adam's like, I don't have time to play that right now. And from everything we've just said, it's not an Easter egg. It's just a reference to another Sierra game. But it felt like one in the moment, so just call them what you want to.
Wait, you had to click on it though, right?
Oh yeah, I did. Mm-hmm. Oh, so it does count by the rules. Yay. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so then don't call it what you want to. Follow the goddamn rules.
This is rigid stuff. Don't mess with the formula. You can hear we've laid it out.
I've said through the course of this very episode where I just don't like hard, fast rules for broad concepts. Mm-hmm. So it's about the spirit rather than the actual terminology. And I have said this probably, I can't remember if I've said this on the show before. I know I've said it off mic a few times because we've talked about like the definition of an RPG. And I came to the conclusion that when it comes to broad concepts, one of two things has to happen. One is you can broaden the definition to be so inclusive in an attempt to cover every single aspect that could possibly qualify, but in doing so, you will inadvertently let in examples that don't necessarily qualify, but fall within those guidelines. Or you can try to like get exclusive and try to find what's the sheer nub of it, like what's like the core definition, and you will accidentally eliminate things that should be considered. So that's why I don't really like a lot of hard, fast rules for broad concept, because one of two things has to happen. Either it's going to be so broad that you'll include things that shouldn't be considered, or you'll make it so exclusive that you will block out things that absolutely should be considered.
And really just to add on to what you said, because there exists no such phrase, I think that we're leaving it where it is in agreement to what you just said, Rick. But I would just say that it does seem like there's room for like a new colorful word that everyone catches on to that describes a reference that's fun to happen across. Because I think 60% of Easter eggs, even to my open interpretation, are just references that take you by surprise and are fun. But it's like not expecting, King Graham in Echo Quest doesn't mean it's an Easter egg. So I'm just saying there are words in our dictionary to describe it, but there's not like a catchy term that everyone has that's an alternate to Easter egg, where it's like, I didn't have to do anything at all. It was spoon-fed, but it caught me pleasantly by surprise. I feel like if we had a term for that, then we could have two more structured groups of things. But again, there isn't, so there's no structure.
But again, that will just give us two new definitions to try to suss out.
But then we could at least just start cleaning this bloody mess up. I mean, it's just it's all over the place.
I can kind of agree to that. I don't know if there is a if I don't know what that term would be, but I don't know. Like I said, I just think it's a Venn diagram, right? It's not two separate camps. There's overlap. And that's all you got to really think. It's like there's not one or the other. It can be both. It could be neither.
Yeah. Well, if I was to go back to earlier in this episode, I would say that if you ultimately if you don't have to do anything to find it, it's just a reference. And I think maybe the one point I brought up that I would stand by this whole episode is just because you understood it doesn't mean you discovered it. So if that might be like the more reasonable thing to ask people of, where it's like, if you find yourself calling it an Easter egg, ask yourself, did I discover it, or am I just stoked that I'm one of the ones that understood it? Because that maybe then we could kind of start sorting things out as far as, references and Easter eggs.
So now at the end of this journey, let's go back to an example from before, a large portrait of Guybrush Threepwood inside of Uncharted. Is this an Easter egg or is it a reference?
Yeah, you bastard.
Yeah. I'd say a reference.
Yeah.
Is it a reference?
By everything.
Yeah.
I can't say anything but yes, because I would just erase everything I said. I'm not saying it would erase my credibility. I have none. But it would undo everything I've said to this point, because it's a reference. And that's why I'm saying call it what you want, because like I get why people call it an Easter egg. But it's, it's not. It's just a reference that you got and 9 other people next to you didn't.
I know. And that's I kind of brought that up because that's actually something which I've kind of blurred throughout the course of this episode. I think at the beginning I said it was an Easter egg, and now I'm kind of like, I don't know now. I'm not sure. I kind of feel like it is, but I kind of feel like it's not, because, like we said, just because you don't get a reference doesn't mean it's an Easter egg.
All right, guys, thank you so much for listening to our show today. Hope you had a good time and got something out of it, I guess, if that's a goal of ours, which I hope it's not. Bloody, come join the discussion and the community. We're on Facebook. We're a page and a group, the Classic Gamers Guild. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at CGG Podcast. Send us an email if you like, mail@classicgamersguild.com. And if you would like, you could become a Patreon and support the show that way. We're on Patreon/Classic Gamers Guild, but we mostly just really want to thank all of our existing Patreons for your support. Really appreciate you guys, and we love you. And I'm really out of breath right now. Hold on. Oh, Jesus Christ. Yes. So thank you guys for your support, and to our Patreons. We did have a Patreon special put out very, very recently. So if you didn't get the memo, you'll find something in your Patreon from us, just a little clip or whatever. And but yeah, so I cannot forget those in our extra special thanks tier. My inner dialogue right now is like, you're blowing it. You're blowing this whole thing right now. It's going off the rails, man. Reel it in. Thank the bloody special thanks. So thank you very much to Una and Gus and Jean-Francois Paget and Jay Holmes and Mark Fillion for your incredible support. That's shocking and amazing, and we really appreciate you guys, and we love you guys. Thank you so much. Please check out Mark Fillion's game Chinatown Detective Agency on Steam. Give it a bloody wish list. It's coming out soon. We're all really excited. And that's bloody that's it. Where's my Pringles can? We don't have it?
I'm forgetting.
Okay, well then, thanks for it. It's not the same. Okay, just don't do a murder.